I swear, Nathan, you're worthless and broke. Just leave already. That's what my wife screamed, no, spat, in my face as she hurled my last suitcase out the front door. It bounced on the pavement like punctuation to the end of a chapter one didn't know we were writing. Beside her stood Trevor, the smug real estate agent she now paraded like a trophy. He wore nothing but Calvin Kleins and a smile that curled like a sneer. They laughed, both of them, loud, careless, while everything I'd built cracked beneath my feet. I stood there, rooted in the cold concrete, in front of the house I had bled for. Mortgage after mortgage, weekend after weekend, fixing gutters, trimming hedges, repainting rooms, for her, for us. You're drowning in debt, she snapped, hurling my suits into the wet grass like bags of trash. She didn't even want to split the divorce. Just vanish, she said. That line didn't just cut. It carved. That night, I didn't cry, didn't sleep. I just stared up at the ceiling fan in my buddy's guest room, its slow turns mocking me like a ticking clock that had run out of time. And I kept thinking, how the hell did it get here? It wasn't always like this. Brittany used to be lightning in a bottle. Blonde hair that caught sunlight like silk. Eyes that looked like they could kill you, and might. Her voice could slice steel. Dangerous. And I thought I could tame her. But snakes don't get tamed. You just wait for the bite. The signs came 3 months before the explosion. Late nights out with the girls. Her phone flipped face down on the counter. Red lipstick again, something she hadn't worn in years. I wasn't stupid, just in love, or addicted to the dream of what we used to be. One night, she came home smelling like cologne, expensive, masculine, not mine. She claimed her friend spilled a drink on her. I nodded, wanted to believe. God, I needed to. But her blouse was misbuttoned. Her neck flushed. You don't need to be Sherlock to see the red flags. So the next week, I followed her. Not proud of it, but I did. She said she was heading to a spa downtown with Jessica and Megan. Even showed me a screenshot of the appointment. But I'd seen that same screenshot in her favorites 2 weeks ago. She wasn't going to a spa. She drove to a gated community in Westwood. Parked like she belonged there. Walked up to Unit 14. Trevor opened the door, shirtless, and pulled her in like she was air and he'd been drowning. That kiss broke something in me. I didn't confront her that night. No, I wanted more. I wanted proof. I wanted blood. So I documented it. Dates, times, photos, GPS logs. I even hid a recorder in her purse. The next day, I heard her say it all. Nathan's clueless. Still thinks we're going to counseling. He's weak. And broke. Trevor's helping me set up the new place. Nathan's not a man. He's a fucking doormat. I saved every word. Then came the morning. D-Day. She handed me coffee, almond milk, just like always. Smiled like she wasn't screwing another man 3 nights a week. That's when I looked her in the eye and said, I know about you and Trevor. She blinked, took a slow sip. So, that word hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. 22 months of lies. Pity sex. Fake tears. Cold dinners. All in one syllable. You're disgusting, I said. And you're broke, she hissed. You really want to do this? You want me to tell people how pathetic you've been? How I faked it just to avoid the silence. Silence. I packed that night. She made sure Trevor was there to help throw out my boxes. The next morning, they sat at the kitchen table, laughing, sipping juice, scrolling Zillow for a new dream home. Like cartoon villains. Then the news dropped. Local startup bought for $400 million. Founder Nathan Cole becomes overnight tech mogul. Their laughter died. Eyes glued to the screen. My name. My face. The man they'd humiliated now worth more than both their lives combined. They didn't know I'd sold the patent last week. I'd been working in silence, fueled by every insult, every eye roll, every betrayal. Brittany dropped her glass. Juice splattered across her sundress. Trevor's jaw unhinged. And me? I stood outside the window, sipping my black coffee, watching them panic. My revenge had just begun. And the night it truly started, the night the illusion shattered, was a Friday. She said she was going wine tasting with the girls. Might crash at Megan's. Told me not to wait up. I kissed her cheek, smiled like a fool, and watched her disappear in that maroon dress I hadn't seen in over a year. Tight. Deliberate. That was the night I knew. This wasn't a marriage. It was a long con. She only ever wore that dress to turn heads, not to sip rose with Megan. The same Megan who dressed like she was in open rebellion against style. Brittany left at exactly 7:03 p.m. By 7:15, I was in my car, engine humming with quiet fury. I knew where Trevor lived, dug it up through a friend in real estate, parked 2 blocks away, and waited, the kind of waiting that chews at your insides. Darkness wrapped around me as I sat there, stewing in silence, chewing on the bitterness like it was jerky. Then her car rolled up. She stepped out, carrying a bottle of wine and a bag far too small for pajamas. She didn't knock, didn't pause. Trevor opened the door, shirtless, smug, and they kissed in the porch light like it was a damn rom-com, like they were proud of it. I filmed everything. I waited. And at 1:17 a.m., when the lights finally went out and she still hadn't come out, I knew. She stayed the night. I drove home with the kind of silence that screams in your ears. My hands clutched the wheels so hard they turned bone white. No tears, just a throbbing pressure behind my eyes. Rage, betrayal, humiliation, all twisting together like barbed wire in my chest. People talk about heartbreak like it's some poetic ache. No, it's a physical blow. A dull knife turning slowly inside you. She came home the next morning around 10, reeking of vanilla and that woody cologne Trevor always wore like a badge. We got so tipsy, I couldn't drive, she said sweetly. Megan made me stay. Megan, I echoed, scrolling my phone like I hadn't watched her lie. I'll have to thank her. She smiled. She says you're a sweetheart. Sweetheart. The word sliced cleaner than any blade. For 2 weeks, I played the role, devoted husband, distracted tech founder. Made her breakfast, kissed her goodbye, complimented her like nothing was unraveling. But every time she walked out that door, I tracked her. Every lie, every fake meeting, every therapy session that led to Trevor's bed. She wasn't even careful. Once she claimed to be stuck in a long line at Target, while lounging poolside with him, sipping margaritas. GPS confirmed it. I had receipts. Literally. Still I waited. Because pain makes you precise. Every smile she gave him, every touch, every laugh, they forged me into stone. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I built a war chest. I gathered assets. Moved shares. Called lawyers. Crafted my exit like a quiet storm while she moaned in another man's condo. Then came the final move. I told her we were drowning. That my startup funding had dried up. That we might have to sell the house. Her eyes flickered, not with concern, but with relief. That was it. That was all I needed. She wanted to leave. And she thought I was broke. Perfect. 2 days later, she asked for a divorce. Said the stress was killing her. I signed without hesitation. She walked away thinking she'd won. Then the news hit. She stood there in the living room, Trevor in his boxers, both clutching their phones like they'd just watched a ghost crawl through the screen. My face was everywhere. Forbes, Bloomberg, NBC. The worthless man had just sold an AI patent for $400 million. I didn't need to say a word. I hadn't planned on walking back in, but I did, just to see their faces. She was frozen in the kitchen, holding her phone like it was on fire. Trevor looked like he'd choked on his own smug. You lied, she hissed, her voice shaking. You cheated, I said, flat and cold. She hurled her phone across the room. You let me think you were broke, you manipulative bastard. I laughed. Couldn't help it. You pretended to be faithful for a year. I played broke for a month. So tell me, Britt, who's the better liar? She stormed up to me, all perfume and fury, like she might strike me. You're a fraud. A coward. And you, I said, locking eyes with the blue eyes behind her mascara, are a gold-digging snake who couldn't keep her legs closed long enough for me to close the deal. That landed like a hammer. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Trevor and I are in love, she snapped, chin high. I nodded, slow and steady. I know. That's why I recorded you two lovebirds moaning through the drywall. Her face froze, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. You what? Audio, video, GPS logs, texts, voice memos. All of it legal. All of it admissible. Trevor finally found his voice. You're bluffing, he said, stepping forward. I just looked at him, let the silence grow thick. Then I pulled out my phone and hit play. Brittany's voice filled the room, breathless, cruel. He's such an idiot. I moaned his name once just so he'd feel useful. Trevor's face drained of color. Brittany looked like she'd been run over. I stopped the recording, slipped the phone back into my pocket. You smug little bitch, I said, stepping closer. You really thought you could humiliate me, walk away with your boy toy, and cash in from the divorce. I don't want your money, she barked, folding her arms like a shield. Keep it. I don't need anything from you. Oh, but you'll be getting something. I smiled, inching even closer. A federal lawsuit. Mail fraud. Wire fraud. Defamation. Property theft. You used my company's funds for your hotel escapades with him, and you signed your name. She went ghost pale. You're bluffing, she whispered, but her voice was trembling. Nope. My lawyer filed this morning. Her lips began to shake. You're doing this just because I moved on? No, Brittany, I said, voice low and sharp. I'm doing this because you laughed while throwing my life onto the sidewalk. Because you made sure I felt worthless. Because you told your friends I wasn't a man. I turned to leave, hand already on the doorknob. This isn't revenge, I said over my shoulder. This is accountability. But just before I stepped out, I glanced back. Oh, and Brittany? She looked up, dazed. Good luck explaining to your new boyfriend why you're heading to federal court for 18 charges of fraud. Trevor stared at her like she'd grown horns, like she might explode at any second. I left them in that silence, the sound of their dream life collapsing like glass under a boot. And for the first time in months, I felt alive. But here's the truth. Revenge didn't fix me. After I walked out that door, after the news, the lawsuits, the headlines, I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the center of me and left nothing but an echo. Yeah, I won. On paper, I won everything. The money, the fame, the respect. People who once ignored me now lined up to shake my hand like I was royalty. But no one saw the bruises beneath the bravado. No one saw the 3 a.m. wake-ups, reaching instinctively for someone who wasn't there. I still brewed 2 cups of coffee every morning, one out of habit. Still caught myself turning to say something to her, only to choke on the silence. I kept wondering, was any of it real? She had all of me. The raw parts. The sacred stories. The fears I never voiced until her. And she used every last one like weapons of war. Not just the cheating, but the mockery. That's what cracked me wide open. I started questioning everything. Was I ever enough? Did she ever really love me? Was it all just performance? The smiles, the laughter, the night she whispered, "I'm proud of you," into my neck? But it was that one sentence, "You're worthless and broke," that haunted me most. Not because it was cruel, because she meant it. She wanted me to believe it so she could justify what she'd done. And I almost did. Some nights, I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, remembering the first time we met. That bar in Seattle. The spilled drink. The way she laughed like nothing else mattered. There was fire in her then. I mistook it for passion. Turns out, it was gasoline, waiting for a match. And yet, I missed her. Not the real her, the fantasy. The version I fell in love with. The woman who maybe never existed. Heartbreak doesn't shatter all at once. It seeps, quiet and slow. A photo here, a song there. Then one day, you're sitting in your $1 million condo, crying into a glass of bourbon, realizing you got played like a damn amateur. I couldn't talk to anyone. My friends just said, "You dodged a bullet." My lawyer? "You destroyed her in court, man." But no one ever asked if I was okay. Because no one expects the guy who won to still feel broken. There was one night, 2 months after her indictment, when the mask cracked. I was sitting on my balcony, scrolling through old photos, and there she was, asleep on the couch, her cat curled on her stomach. No makeup, lips parted slightly, peaceful. And for just a second, I forgot everything. And I lost it. The sobs came out of nowhere, ugly, shaking, soul deep. My chest heaved, my ribs ached, and for a moment, I wanted to claw the grief out of myself with bare hands. Because no matter what she did, I had loved her. Loved her with a fool's kind of love. The kind that's raw, unfiltered, and blindly loyal. And she set that love on fire, then stood there laughing as it burned. But grief is strange. It doesn't just destroy, it purifies. Eventually, the sobs stopped. The sharp ache dulled. The memories softened, from blades to bruises to lessons. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But I wasn't drowning either. I was floating, tired, but alive. And in that stillness, it hit me. The man she shattered, he wasn't coming back. And that was good. That man had loved recklessly. Now, I was someone else, someone learning how to stand in his own skin again. When the emotional fog started to lift, I knew it was time to make some brutal decisions. Not just about Brittany, about me. About the kind of man I wanted to become on the other side of this wreckage. For years, I'd built a life with her. Every move I made, every risk, every win, every failure. was with her in mind. Now I was sitting on top of a fortune, alone, in the ruins of what used to be my future, asking myself, what now? The divorce was in motion. But I didn't want a clean break. I wanted a total purge. No shared friends. No shared spaces. Hell, I even changed grocery stores to avoid anyone who might ask about her. 2 weeks after our last conversation, she was arrested. The feds moved in once we handed over the proof. Brittany had siphoned company money, faked reimbursements, booked luxury stays under my business account. Trevor had signed off as her partner. Turns out, they weren't just unfaithful, they were criminals. Everyone told me to drop it. You've already won. Let it go. But I couldn't. I couldn't forget the way she laughed while tossing my life into the driveway like trash. The way Trevor smirked like I was nothing but a stepping stone. That wasn't just betrayal. That was predatory. So I chose war. We pressed every charge. My lawyers were surgical, cold, methodical, merciless. They uncovered things I hadn't even seen. This wasn't a one-off mistake. Brittany had been draining me for months, forging documents, funding her affair, even starting a side business under my name using my software. When I saw that fake company registration with her signature, it felt like poison in my lungs. But it also gave me clarity. This wasn't about love. This was about erasure. She hadn't just wanted someone else. She wanted my life handed to him. So I made another decision. I started therapy. Yeah, it sounded cliché, but after everything, I needed to understand why I let someone like her crawl that deep into my soul. Why I ignored the signs. Why I stayed when I knew something was rotting. Dr. Sharon King didn't sugarcoat a thing. In our second session, she said, "You weren't stupid. You were committed." People like her weaponized that. And she was right. I wasn't a fool. I was faithful, to a fault. And Brittany used that faithfulness like a choke chain. I also chose silence. I declined every interview, every blog post, every docuseries pitch. Not because I had something to hide, but because I didn't want her name clinging to my success like mildew on marble. I didn't want to be the guy who got cheated on and got rich. I wanted to be the man who survived her. So I sold the house, moved to Napa, bought a quiet place tucked between vineyards and sky. No more designer furniture. No shared closets. No lies. No Brittany. She made her choice the day she laughed at my pain. Now I was making mine. And this time, I chose me. The day she was officially sentenced, I didn't know what to expect. Triumph? Relief? Some dramatic wave of victory? But as I sat in that courtroom, surrounded by the sterile scent of old paper and cheap cologne, I realized something that stopped me cold. No punishment would ever undo what she did to me. Not really. She stood there in shackles, pale, composed, but defiant. Her eyes swept the courtroom, landing on her parents, a few friends from her old life. But when they found me, they darkened, poisoned with the same venom I saw the day she tossed my life onto the curb like trash. Only this time, she wasn't in control. Now, she was just another criminal caught in her own web of lies. Another face behind a chain of consequences finally snapping into place. The judge read the sentence. The gavel came down. 18 years. 18 years in federal prison. I watched her face. How her eyes flicked wide for just a second, stunned, like her brain refused to compute it. But then came the anger. That cold, sharp fury she always carried when things didn't go her way. She turned to me, lips curled in a twisted smile. "You think this changes anything? You think this is justice?" Her voice cut through the silence. "You've taken everything from me. But you'll never take my freedom, Nathan. Never." I said nothing. I didn't need to. Her words were empty, just echoes of all the times she tried to rewrite the truth. But now, she had no audience. No followers. No applause. Just a cold cell waiting for her. I stayed standing, not to gloat, not to taste victory, but to feel the weight of it all land, to finally breathe beneath it. And as it settled, I realized something that had taken me far too long to understand. If I wanted to win, truly win, I had to let go. Let go of the anger, the need for revenge, the ache for her to feel what she made me feel. Because the power she once had over me, it ended the moment I no longer needed her to suffer. She didn't deserve an apology. I didn't need her regret. My victory wasn't her downfall. It was my freedom. When I walked out of that courtroom, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy. I felt still, peaceful, a kind of quiet that had eluded me for years. And the world moved on. The whispers stopped. The gossip dried up. Her old friends, the ones who used to praise her like a queen, started reaching out, guilt dripping from their words. They were sorry. They admitted they'd been wrong. I didn't want their pity, didn't need their validation. I had my house, my peace, my breath, and more than anything, I had closure. Because it was never just about her. It was about me. About the years I'd spent twisting myself into knots to become the man she said I should be, when that man was just a projection of her own brokenness. That version of me, he was gone. In his place was someone new, someone curious. I started to travel. Paris, Tokyo, Buenos Aires. No more waiting for permission. No more living for someone else. I dove back into my work, not to prove anything, but because it fulfilled me. I even stepped away from tech for a while, took on a creative project that made no sense on paper, but brought me joy. I bought a vineyard in Napa. Quiet. Simple. Mine. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the life I was building, on my terms. And in those still moments, on the back porch, a glass of wine in hand, sun sinking over the hills, I realized I was free. The woman who tried to ruin me was gone, locked away by the weight of her own deceit. And I was moving forward. A year had passed since that sentencing. It felt both distant and fresh, like a scar you forget about until you run your fingers over it. My new life didn't feel like a reconstruction. It felt like a rebirth, one I earned through fire and silence, and every broken piece I'd stitched back together. But as I dug deeper into this new version of myself, I realized the healing wasn't just about rebuilding what she broke. It was about discovering who I was without her. The world had changed. So had I. In those first months after the sentencing, I moved through a fog. Moments of clarity came like lightning, brief and blinding, but mostly, I was numb. The anger, the grief, the confusion, they clung like smoke. But I kept going. One day, then the next. I focused on the vineyard, the house, the little things. Until one day, out of nowhere, something unexpected happened. Emily, one of Brittany's old friends, the one who always said she admired how patient I was, the one who told me Brittany just needed space when I questioned her absences. She texted me, said she wanted to meet for coffee. At first, I didn't want to go. The idea of sitting across from someone so tied to Brittany felt like dragging a scalpel across scars barely closed. But something in me, curiosity, maybe closure, nudged me to say yes. Emily was already there when I arrived. Corner booth, latte in hand, trying to look relaxed but failing. Her smile flickered when she saw me. Too wide, too tight. She stood up quickly, as if she'd been holding her breath. "I'm sorry," she blurted before I even sat down. "I know this must be hard. I wasn't a good friend. I should have seen it. I should have said something." I studied her face. She looked nervous, guilty, maybe even sincere. But sincerity didn't undo years of silence, of turning away when it would have been easier to speak up. "Don't apologize to me," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "You didn't hurt me." She did. "But you let her." She flinched. But to her credit, she stayed. "I know," she said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you the truth. You deserve that." The truth. That elusive thing I'd been chasing through the wreckage of my marriage, trying to separate what was real from what was rehearsed. Emily leaned in, lowering her voice. "Brittany didn't change, Nathan. She was always like this. She played you, from the beginning." The words hit like frostbite. She hesitated, then added, "You weren't the first. Trevor was just the last. She's been cheating for years. She never loved you. Not the way you loved her." The air went still. Her words were heavy, but familiar. I'd suspected. I'd wondered. But hearing it from someone who had stood by and watched it unfold, it hollowed me out. I thought I could save her. I murmured, not to her, but to whatever broken piece of me still believed I could have done something different. If I was just good enough. Emily reached across the table, fingers brushing mine. "Nathan, you were more than enough. You were everything she needed. But you weren't what she wanted. She never wanted a partner. She wanted a puppet." Her words burned, but behind the pain came something else. Clarity. I didn't need to carry this anymore. I didn't need to shoulder the blame for her chaos. I wasn't the failure. She was. I pulled my hand back. Took a breath. "You're right. I spent years trying to fix something that was never broken." "I know," she said gently. "You've made it through. I can see it in your eyes." And somehow, I believed her. I had made it. Not just free of Brittany, but free of the version of me that had lived in her shadow. The man who begged for her love, who mistook pain for passion, who lost himself trying to keep someone who never truly wanted to stay. Now, I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need a spotlight to shine on my worth. Through betrayal, through fire, I had found something she could never touch. I'd found me. The last few months had been quiet. Still, strange, but also healing. I spent more time alone than I ever thought I could tolerate. And in that solitude, I met someone I hadn't seen in years. Myself. No pressure to impress. No pretending. No performing. Just me, finally breathing. And I liked who I was becoming. I started steering my business into new waters. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I poured myself into projects that mattered. Ones that gave back. That left a mark for more than profit. The startup had succeeded beyond anything I'd imagined. But that wasn't the fuel anymore. Now, it was about legacy. Impact. Meaning. Still, that question lingered. What now? It echoed one evening as I sat on the porch of my vineyard, watching the sun melt into the hills, the sky stained gold and violet. I had everything I thought I'd wanted. Time, space, peace. And in that quiet, a new hunger stirred. Not for her, not for Brittany, but for something deeper, something real. So I started traveling, not for work. For me. To places I'd only dreamed of. Not chasing anything. Just exploring. Rediscovering the world with open eyes and no baggage. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from the past. I was walking toward the future. I traveled to places that once lived only in the quiet corners of my daydreams. Places I'd never had the time or the courage to explore. I stood beneath the swirling magic of the northern lights in Iceland. Wandered the sacred ruins of ancient temples in Cambodia. Hiked through the jagged majesty of the Alps. The cold air sharp in my lungs, each step carrying me farther from the man I used to be. With every mile, I shed another layer of the past, no longer defined by betrayal, no longer shackled by the need to prove anything to anyone. But the real transformation didn't happen on mountaintops or in the glow of distant skies. It happened when I made a decision I never saw coming. I went back to school, enrolled in online courses, dipping my toes into philosophy, history, and everything in between. At first, it was just a challenge, something to keep my mind busy. But the more I read, the more I unearthed about the world, yes, but also about myself. I began to see how small I'd made my life, how tightly I'd clung to someone else's vision of who I should be. I had measured success in dollars, accolades, approval. But now, I was learning the strength in vulnerability, the power in letting go. Brittany's betrayal had been a catalyst, not just for loss, but for awakening. I had played a part in my own undoing. I let myself be taken for granted. And in facing that truth, I began to heal in ways I never thought possible. And then, there was Lena. She didn't crash into my world like a lightning bolt. She arrived softly, quietly, like sunlight through blinds after a long night. We met at a charity event where I was invited to speak on the future of tech. I expected the usual small talk, the polite nods. But then there she was, standing by the wine table, laughing at something dry and clever someone said, her eyes clear, her presence steady. We talked, not about tech or success or headlines, but about books, places we loved, why certain songs made us cry. The conversation wasn't trying to be anything. It just was. She asked questions like she meant them. She listened like she cared. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to perform. We exchanged numbers. I didn't expect much. But the next day, I texted her. And soon it became dinners, long walks, hours under the stars where the silence between words said more than any speech ever could. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't fireworks. It was better. It was real. Lena didn't need fixing. And she didn't try to fix me. We were two people who had lived through our own storms, carrying the rain with us, but no longer letting it soak the floor beneath our feet. We shared, not to be saved, but to be seen. And through her, I learned something I'd never understood before. Love isn't about completion. It's not about rescue. It's about choice. Two people choosing each other, choosing to show up, to stay soft in a world that teaches us to harden. Brittany had taught me what love should never be. Through the pain she left behind, I'd learned how to love myself. Lena was something else entirely. She wasn't a bandage over a wound. She was a new page in a book I thought I'd stopped writing. And so here I am, a man once broken, now rebuilt, Not back to who I was, but someone better. Someone forged in fire, but shaped by hope. I'm not chasing peace anymore. I'm living in it.